This is Cruise Radio.
I cruise a lot, and I always sail with travel insurance. You should, too. Get a free quote today at tripinsurance.com.
Here we go. Broadcasting from the tripinsurance.com studios in Jacksonville, Florida, this is Cruise Radio.
Hey, how's it going? My name is Doug Parker. Thank you so much for checking out this episode of Cruise Radio. Very happy to have you here. A review of Norwegian Encore, a 7-night Alaska cruise out of Seattle with my buddy Matt. He made the journey across the country to hop on Encore and explore Southeast Alaska. He joins us on the line now. How you doing, Matt?
Hey, Doug. Good to hear your voice, man. As I had said the last time I reviewed a ship with you, thank you for all that you do for the industry and keeping us all enlightened on a weekly basis. I cannot tell you how much every time your show drops on Thursdays, by the way, and I'm heading to work to my office on Friday, it makes you're sort of the first part of my weekend.
A prelude to the festivities, I guess you could say.
Absolutely. Indeed. Good to be with you.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. So you are down in Southwest Florida, and this cruise embarked out of Seattle, Washington. So let's get some pre-cruise thoughts here. So first off, what made you want to take this 7-nighter out of Seattle to Southeast Alaska?
Yeah, man. So my wife's family, in particular her grandmother, who has taken many Alaskan cruises, planned this trip. And it's probably a good thing that she did, Doug, because we probably would have never actually done this ourselves. Not that we didn't want to do it, but we're more of, I would say, warm weather vacation people, despite living here in Tampa. We love cruising the Caribbean or the Med and getting an all-inclusive somewhere in the Caribbean or Latin America. So just the fact that how far this is, from the Gulf Coast of Florida. I'm in my mid-30s. My wife is in her late 20s, and we've only been married for about a year and a half now. And we've done a lot of traveling and a lot of cruises. This was cruise number 29 for me and my wife's 10th. So if you think about it, Doug, with where we live at here in Tampa, it's actually almost easier for us to hop across the ditch and do a Mediterranean cruise than it is to actually do an Alaskan cruise. So it was always one of those, we'll get to it if we can. But without her family coming up with this idea, I can't say that it actually would have happened. So it was kind of a blessing in disguise.
You mentioned it was a long haul over there to Seattle. So any pre-cruise time before you're sailing?
We did, as we always do. And I agree with you and Richard and pretty much any of your other listeners who are avid cruisers, always smart to fly in the night before. We actually had, I guess, the only problem with heading over there, we did have a 4-hour layover in Denver. So we flew from Tampa to Denver and then on to Seattle. Luckily, my wife actually has a Capital One Venture X card. So they just happened to, I guess, coincidentally open a new Capital One lounge there in the Denver airport. So we ate and drank for free there for about 3.5 hours until it was time to catch our connecting flight in Seattle. So it was a great way to start the vacation. I'm actually from Louisiana, and I grew up below sea level, so I was worried about actually being able to breathe there in Denver, but I was fine, thankfully. And so we made it to Seattle. We actually stayed in the Renaissance Hotel in downtown Seattle. Very nice hotel, great staff, and we had dinner at a seafood restaurant with my wife's entire family down, I guess, by the wharf area there, about 5 to 10 minute Uber from the hotel. Again, in that famous, the name escapes me, but the famous wharf and Fisherman's Wharf area, I guess, there in Seattle. And the hotel was actually on a pretty steep street there in the city, and it was raining, so walking wasn't really an option. But we had a great night before the embarkation.
Yeah, I didn't realize how hilly. I think I stayed at, maybe it was the Sheraton, could be a Marriott by now. Last time I cruised out of Seattle, and I walked down to Pike's Place or whatever the marketplace is called down there.
That's the name I couldn't remember.
Yeah, and I was like, this is pretty steep. I didn't realize how steep it was in Seattle.
Exactly, me neither. And coincidentally, my father was actually stationed in Seattle or outside of Seattle when he was in the military. And so I used to go up there when I was a kid for a couple of summers here and there. And I didn't remember that it was that hilly either.
I know you're from Louisiana, so what'd you think of the seafood up there?
Very, very different, but in a good way. And I've always, a lot of people joke with me about being from Louisiana. I've always respected I guess, elsewhere seafood, if you will. I totally am thinking that the Gulf seafood is always going to be number one, in my opinion. But I really enjoy, the halibut and the clean, very crisp fish that they have up there on the Pacific Northwest. And look, again, I grew up in Louisiana. I now live in Florida. It's not the same type of seafood. So trust me, I'm very aware of how good it is up there. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I really want to quickly say, Doug, before we get into first impressions of the ship here, I not to get too, I guess, political on your show, but I think a lot of the West Coast cities have kind of been hammered for things like, homeless issues. And I think a lot of that is justified, but it really seems like Seattle has tried to clean that up a lot. And so I really didn't experience any of that while we were there. Really wanted to give a nod to the city that Seattle seems like it's back on a good track right now.
That's good to hear. So you make your way down to the pier to board Norwegian Encore. How was the embarkation process for you, and how long did it take you from the curb to the ship?
Yeah, embarkation was very easy. The hotel, and it was right near I think Sheridan you were talking about, so probably the similar experience when you went. The hotel was only about a 10-minute ride to the port. My wife's grandmother had really set it up well. We actually had a Mercedes charter shuttle van from the hotel to the port for the entire family. There was a total of 9 of us, by the way. And the driver kind of, once he learned that a lot of the group had actually never been to Seattle, he actually drove us right by the Space Needle on the way to the port. And I had been to Seattle multiple times, but a lot of my wife's family had not. So they really enjoyed that. And it was really, really a quick drive. And once we got to the port, it was kind of chaotic looking at first. I think because Michaela, who's my wife, I think that it was because we had never been to that particular port after sailing so many times, whether it was out of a South Florida port or here in Tampa or obviously over in the Mediterranean like Barcelona. But they had porters and port staff that were everywhere directing everyone. And my wife's grandmother actually had a friend with her who is in a wheelchair. And someone from the port staff came right out to the curb and ushered them to a special area, which was nice to see. And it really didn't take us long at all, probably 20 to 25 minutes curb to ship.
You make your way on Norwegian Encore. Was this your first time on a Breakaway Plus class ship?
You know what, Doug? I'll give you I'm not sure, because okay. I'm not sure if the Norwegian Escape is a Breakaway Plus class ship, but I know it's definitely Breakaway. So I had been familiar with this, I guess, class of ship. And I'll be honest with you, Doug, and this goes back into kind of someone else, really, I guess, not booking the trip, but coming up with the idea. My wife and I are not the biggest NCL people. Mm-hmm. I'll go ahead and tell you that. And I'll get more into the reasons why here in a bit. But if I'm doing a standard cruise, we're probably going to go with Royal. If I'm splurging a little bit, I'm probably going to go with Celebrity. And if I'm sticking to a budget, I'm probably going to go with MSC. Also, with 2 of those 3 lines, we actually have the highest status. And then the other one, we have the second highest. So whereas with NCL, we have very little status. But again, this particular cruise ship and time worked out best for the whole family. And so that's how we actually ended up doing this particular, I guess, ship and itinerary. The ship itself, by the way, is gorgeous. I had actually sailed, as I mentioned a second ago, on one of its sister or cousin ships, the Norwegian Escape, back in 2017. So I knew that the ship was going to be nice. I really enjoyed how they had the observation deck set up on deck 15. Mm-hmm. It pretty much takes up about half of that entire deck, Doug, which is great for all of those incredible Alaskan views that you get. Although it does get crowded up there, we were always able to get a seat there in the observation lounge, and it was probably our favorite part of the ship. I can tell you, buddy, a lot of Irish coffees and spiked hot chocolates and apple ciders were consumed up there.
As they should.
Yes, indeed, sir. Yes, indeed. And again, Doug, I don't think we thought, because, again, we had never been on a cold weather cruise before, I don't think we thought about how much time you spend inside of the ship. But our other spot that we really enjoyed was called the Mojito Bar on deck 8 midship. What was cool about that particular bar was that you could actually grab a drink and then walk right outside by the bar onto a side deck and, of course, enjoy those amazing Alaskan views in the fresh air. So all in all, one of Norwegian's best ships. It's pretty awesome.
Just to go back on the ship classes, so Norwegian Breakaway and Getaway were Breakaway class, and you had Escape, Joy, Bliss, and Encore that are all Breakaway Plus class.
I figured you or Richard would tell me.
Yeah. What kind of stateroom did you book for this 7-night cruise, and what did you think of it?
All right, lot to get to with the stateroom, okay? So we actually had an interior room on deck 15 forward, so we were pretty high up. This is very rare for us, Doug. Normally, we're balcony people all the way. And we originally actually had a balcony room within our package. But, Doug, I do pretty well, even though I work in government and journalism, and my wife is actually in education. But this was by far the most expensive cruise that we had ever taken. And that includes past cruises of having suites, sailing premium lines, and sailing pretty much all over the world. Mm-hmm. So just understand that if you're taking an Alaskan cruise, you're going to pay for it. Yeah. So the day before our final payment was due, however many months ago that was, we actually demoted ourselves from a balcony to an interior room, and we saved like $1,000. I mean, it was quite substantial. So we actually didn't feel as bad doing this as you might think, because you have to remember, my wife's family had 3 balcony rooms already. So if we wanted to enjoy those views of Glacier Bay and other things, we could just go to their rooms and hang out with a drink. But most of the time, everyone convened in the observation lounge or another part of the ship anyway. So we weren't having as much FOMO as you might think. But if I could have that one back, I probably would have gone with the balcony room. And it's funny you mentioned that. I remember listening to your review of your Alaskan cruise recently, and, you know, kind of stating that you said, yeah, if you can do it, definitely go for the balcony room in Alaska.
The family who had the balconies, were they like all connecting?
Yeah, they were on deck 8.
Okay.
They were actually, what was kind of funny, they were actually right by the, I'm not sure the name of it, but like the English pub that's there on the ship. Mm-hmm. So like we would literally go to their rooms, you know, hang out, especially Glacier Bay, day was the day that we probably spent the most time in their rooms. And we would all just go grab a drink at the pub and then double back right there to their room. So they were in a very good spot.
Sounds like it. It's also always a good time when you can, you know, have a group of people on a balcony on one side and you can open it up and it's like one big bowling lane of just space.
It really was. That was awesome. By the way, the room itself that we had, let me just say that my first experience with an interior room was a little tight. I'm 6'5", 250 pounds. So let's just say things were quite snug, but we got very creative with our bags and kind of sneaking things into corners and basically finding any space we could. I will give Norwegian a lot of credit. I guess because the ship was built right before the pandemic in 2019. There were USB-Cs in the room. There were plenty of outlets in the room. And it actually had right by the bed, it had the little switches to where you could control all of the lights for the entire room. Whereas I know, obviously, the older ships, you kind of have to do that over by the bathroom area. The other thing that we were really worried about with our location of the stateroom was we were actually literally the last cabin right by an elevator bank. But somehow, some way, we didn't hear anybody the entire time. Literally, when we walked out of our room, we walked across the elevator bank area, and then the other side is where the doors opened up to the observation lounge. So it turned out to be a very good spot.
Yeah, and this ship came out towards the end of 2019, and of course we had the shutdown, and then the restart, it came back online like 21. So you were really on a ship that was only a couple of years old.
Exactly. You could tell. It's got all the modern amenities. I can tell why Norwegian kind of keeps this. I understand that obviously you've got the Viva or the Prima class. I'm not sure what they're calling it now, but you can see why Norwegian kind of keeps this at the top of the list right now.
Certainly. How was the bathroom size in that cabin?
We laughed because the bathroom almost was big, not bigger than the room, but the bathroom was almost seemed like it had more space than what we were expecting for this size room. And my wife and I kind of joked. I was like, I would have taken another foot or two out of the bathroom and put it in this room. I'm serious. Again, I'm very tall, but I could lay in the middle of the bed and touch each wall. But that's what we get. We saved $1,000.
That sounds good to me. So you make your way up to the Ocean View Cafe, the buffet for NCL. What were your thoughts throughout the week?
That was also on deck 15, but the other side. So we had a little bit, let's say from our stateroom, we had a little bit of a walk. I think that was on the back side. And so we had a little bit of a walk from our room as opposed to the observation lounge. The food was good. I'm never going to tell you that we spend a lot of time in the buffet. We're more dining room people, even if it's like for breakfast or lunch. But we did spend, I would say probably did 4 meals the entire cruise, mostly for breakfast there. And it was adequate, good choices, good hours, everything like that. It's a cruise buffet. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it was wonderful, but it certainly got the job done. And the food was pretty consistently good.
As far as, trying to find a seat, I know you can get pretty busy in there at times. Was seating okay every time you went in there?
For the most part. Normally what my wife and I do, particularly if we're on a Caribbean cruise or a warmer Mediterranean cruise, normally what we do is we just go all the way to the back. We like the views outside and things of that nature. So we always were able to find a seat. I can't tell you that, once at first glance, we were able to sit down every time. But, once we circled once, it was always someone getting up, and they were very quick to clean up the table and get it turned over. So we didn't have any issue.
How about the main dining room, or I guess NCL calls them restaurants? You have 3 of them: Savor, Taste, and the Manhattan Manhattan restaurant in the back. I'm just going to always say main dining room. How was your experience in those places throughout the week?
That's got a little bit of a long one here. The dining was actually pretty good, Doug. If I had to give it, say, an academic score, I'd give it a B+.
Okay.
Nothing was bad in terms of food quality or taste. And only a few things were great, again. So I'm not going to give it an overall exceptional, but most things were pretty consistently good. In cruising Norwegian in the past, I used to hit them pretty hard for their food, but I would definitely say that they've improved since the 2010s. Of course, it is freestyle dining, which you would think would be great when taking an Alaskan cruise, because you're getting back at, from those excursions at, relatively late in the day, most of the time. However, in the 3 main dining rooms, whether it was the Manhattan room, which is the largest, or the 2 twin dining rooms that are smaller called Taste and Savor, as you mentioned, there were multiple times, Doug, that we were told that we could not be seated because of our group size, even when we were willing to wait. And one time, they tried to actually deny us seating, even though we were willing to split up into 2 smaller groups, one of 4 and the other of 5. Remember that we had 9 people. Mm-hmm. And so the other problem that we had with the main dining rooms was that there were 2 port stops. I can't remember exactly which ones, Doug, to where the vast majority of the people got back on the ship at like 9 or 10 at night. Okay. Despite the fact that it was still daylight outside with Alaska, of course. And the maitre d's and the staff there in the main dining rooms were trying to tell people that the restaurants closed at 10 p.m. and that no new people could be seated after 10 p.m. And there were extremely long lines of people, again, Doug, waiting because the vast majority of people had gotten back on the ship at those times. And they were trying to eat and were being told that they could not eat in the main dining rooms. So there was so much of an uproar that on those particular nights, you started to see officers with 3 and 4 stripes on their shoulders there appear. And finally, the restaurants were made to stay open by several hours to accommodate everyone. And I'm not sure how that works on other cruise lines. And this is my one and only Alaskan cruise, Doug, but that is definitely something Norwegian needs to adjust to accommodate with port times. So I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but I just found it weird that the dining rooms would close when the vast majority of people at those 2 ports are getting back at 9 or 10 o'clock at night. Weird.
Was the food good at least?
The actual food in the main dining rooms was good. Again, nothing out of this world, but pretty good and pretty consistent. I found the variety to be pretty good, and I was able to kind of switch it up between seafood one night or a steak the other night or a pasta one night. Same thing with my wife and her family. So we did actually go to 2 specialty restaurants during our cruise, both of which were fantastic. Earlier in the cruise, we ate at the French restaurant. The food was phenomenal. I had the rack of lamb, and my wife actually got escargot and some type of carbonara, and others had beef bourguignon, and just the experience, the views, the food, everything was perfect. And then the other specialty restaurant that we had was the Hibachi Grill. Really great experience. The usual jokes and excellent abundance of food from the hibachi chefs there. But when you're with 9 people, all of which were kind of sauced up like we were, hibachi can get real fun. And I'll just say we kind of took over the restaurant that night.
I was just interviewing someone who said, going as a couple, it's like, okay, but going as a group, it's 10 times the fun.
Yes, it is. And I think I got so full that night. It was one of the nights, we actually turned in early. I just told Michaela, hey, we got to go back to the room. I just felt like I had a bowling ball on me the rest of the night. So anyway.
Did you hit up the 24-hour restaurant, the local?
So we did hit up the local one day for breakfast because the dining room was not accepting. I think we slept in or by the time everyone was able to get together as the full group, we went to the local for breakfast. Pretty good food. The other place that we tried, for twice for lunch, we went to the American Diner, I think is what it's called, which is kind of on the outside of the ship up on a pool deck. And so parts of it are very chilly, but they have these huge heaters in there that kind of keep it mostly warm. And, great place to get burgers and hot dogs and things like that. And so really enjoyed the American Diner as well.
Okay, so you've been on almost 30 cruises. How did the entertainment stack up on Norwegian Encore?
Doug, the entertainment has definitely improved from NCL years past. Thank God they have finally, I think you'll agree with me here because I know how much you love stage shows and everything, wink, wink. Thank God they have retired Kinky Boots and the Footloose show and Cats and all the other worn out stuff that NCL had seemed to, Doug, they had seemed to have some of those shows on for 15 years. At least it seemed that way. I'm sure it wasn't that long. So there were 2 excellent comedians on the ship. One was from Boston and the other was from Cleveland. We saw both of them at the social club on deck 6 on different nights. And then they went back to back on another night in the main theater. They were just great. I wish I could remember their names. The gentleman from Boston was a younger African-American guy. And the other guy from Cleveland was kind of this old, kind of grandpa-ish looking white guy. But both of their acts were so different, but so great at the same time. They're members of a levity comedy group, which I'm a fan of anyway, if you know about any comedy clubs around the U.S., just a great, great show. And then the biggest show that they did was called Choir of Man, which is really kind of getting rave reviews with Norwegian right now. Very entertaining, about 6 or 7 British guys in a pub talking about the importance of camaraderie and singing kind of excellent rock and country songs in between, basically reminding us to get out and have fun again after the pandemic. And they really do mix in a lot of comedy and slapstick stuff in between the songs. And really, the set is really cool. They've got it designed basically like a giant English pub, and they invite the crowd to come up and get free beer before the show begins. Nice touch by Norwegian to have this. The only negative from an entertainment standpoint that we were supposed to have a magician on the ship, which my wife loves magic shows. And unfortunately, they didn't really let anybody know that show had been canceled. So everyone showed up to the theater one night expecting to see a magic show, and the Beatles guys came out. And so not that, we all love the Beatles, but there was another Beatles show, of course, in the Cavern Club as well as in the main theater later on in the cruise. And so everyone was, I think, quite disappointed. And apparently, I guess the magician got sick or something happened right at the last second. So I understand Norwegian really didn't have much of a choice, but that was a little disappointing. But other than that night, the entertainment was excellent this cruise.
Did you get to test out the go-kart track?
We went up and we witnessed the go-kart track. There was one day relatively early in the cruise, maybe day 3 or 4, when we were still sailing. We had not reached a port yet, and it was sunny outside, even though it was still quite chilly. And man, it is a very cool scene. We thought about it, Doug, but ultimately just decided not to do it. But very, very cool touch. And the fact that they somehow were able to fit all of that along with the laser tag area and the gaming area and all of that and still have a pretty sizable pool deck was pretty amazing. Credit, again, the ship is incredible. It really is.
How about the casino as far as the smoke situation? I know on that class of ship, or I guess a lot of the classes, you have to walk through it to get from point A to point B.
Non-existent in terms of smoking issues. I will give them a lot of credit, and there's a particular reason why. When you walk through the main part of the casino, if you look, I guess if you're, let's say, walking towards the Manhattan dining room, which is right on the other side of the casino, you would walk past this glass area to your left. And it is basically a private, I guess, second casino for smokers. So you can literally go in there and it will open up as if you're going into a store or an airport or something like that. And you hear sort of a suction noise above the door. And so it does never allow, I guess, any smoke smell out of that, secondary casino room. So man, I wish every cruise ship would do this. It was non-existent, never had a problem with smoke.
That reminds me of, remember the old days? They might still have them, I don't know, but they had the little smoking rooms at the airports, like the aquariums almost.
Yeah, I do remember that. And what was funny would be, and I enjoy cigars. I have nothing against people who smoke, to each their own. But I remember, being at a major hub. I can't remember if it was, DFW or Houston or Atlanta or somewhere like that when they used to have those, and you would see like the nervous smoker would be like hauling butt to get to that room to be able to get their fix. It would always seriously, they'd knock you out of the way to get in that room.
I think it was probably Atlanta, because it's those long terminals, right? A through F or whatever. Yep. So yeah, that's probably where it was. So, let's talk about sea days here. You had a couple of sea days because you had that one sea day on the front end, and then you had like the Glacier Bay, which is technically a sea day. So how was it as far as crowds and congestion?
Sea days were fine. There was never really any crowds or congestion, in the traditional sense of cruising. Obviously, you're not going to have any trouble finding deck chairs or anything like that if you actually do want to sit outside in the cold. The one difference with crowd congestion on sea days was that you'll find with an Alaskan cruise as opposed to, say, sailing in the Caribbean or Mediterranean, is that you have a lot of people that will bottleneck on the interior parts of the ships, near bars and restaurants or areas that are kind of social spots, so that they can play trivia or do other indoor, activities, given that, of course, outside is still very chilly. But mostly I found it pretty good. I think this ship is very well designed for Alaska. And I think NCL did the right thing by putting this type of ship for Alaskan itineraries. There was only 2 negatives about the sea days when it came to crowds and congestion, and that was that you would never seem to be able to catch one of the hot tubs. They were always inundated with kids or just people kind of overcrowding the tubs, no matter which one you tried to go to. And the other biggest negative of this entire ship, I don't understand this at all for having this in Alaska, but there is no public solarium on this ship. The only solarium that they've got is for Haven class guests. I just find that very missing the boat, pardon the pun, for an Alaskan cruise, because everybody wanted to be outside looking at these views or looking at the sky or whatever the case was, particularly when it was clear. But you could only be outside for so long to handle the cold and the wind before you'd have to go back inside. And so that is a huge negative, probably the only negative of this entire ship.
I can't remember. Does this ship have a Spice H2O, or is it blocked because of the go-kart track?
Negative. And that will continue. I actually befriended, as you seem to always do on every cruise, I befriended maybe an officer who was in charge of the bar staff on a particular bar that we kept going to. And I asked about that because, again, it had been since 2017 that I had been on a Norwegian ship. And so, but he told me they're going to continue to phase out Spice H2O.
Okay, that's interesting, but I guess if you're going to stack on go-karts, laser tag, the Vibe Beach Club, all that, you have to make some sacrifices somewhere. Let's talk about your ports of call here. You had a Sea Day, Ketchikan, Skagway, Victoria, British Columbia, Juneau? I probably am missing some, so let's just dive right in.
Yeah, so our first port, day number 3 was Juneau. Doug, I was very impressed with the capital city of Alaska. I really thought the scenery was cool, really enjoyed the local shops and the local architecture and kind of just walking around that main square of Juneau. But the big part of this port was that my wife's mother, my mother-in-law, who is an amazing person, surprised the entire group the night before by letting us know that she had set up a private whale watching tour for Juneau. And she had apparently booked it several months in advance, kept the secret, and dropped the bomb on us, the night before. Mm-hmm. So we were picked up back at the port by a van that took us about 30 miles outside of the city to board this small vessel. And we spent the next 5 hours or so in this pristine water around Juneau and the surrounding mountains, and of course saw the Mendenhall Glacier and multiple different kinds of whales. And Doug, I can honestly say this, after 29 cruises, I can truly say that was the best excursion I've ever taken on a cruise. It was just sensational. And to, I guess, add icing to the cake, my wife's brother proposed to his girlfriend, who's now his fiance, while we were on this smaller boat, and the whales were kind of surrounding the boat. So nice touch. I think that they enjoyed the rest of their day quite substantially.
Man, all kind of surprises in Juneau.
Yeah. No kidding.
Well, Juneau sounded fun and a blast. How about Skagway?
Yeah, Skagway was our second port of call, day number 4. And pretty much right when we got to the shore, Doug, in the morning, we headed to our next excursion, which was boarding the famed White Pass Railroad train that takes you up into the mountains surrounding Skagway and actually over into Canada for a brief period of time. And so my wife and I, to be honest with you, when we saw this, researching Alaska and everything like that, were kind of skeptical that this was going to be kind of a tourist trap and kind of, to the point where it was, I guess, tacky or something like that. It actually ended up being one of our favorite things of the entire cruise. Just amazing scenery that causes you to think how incredible it was that people in the late 1800s were actually able to build this railroad. I don't even know how they'd be able to build it now, let alone building it in the 1800s. And you want to talk about a difference in climate, everything like that. When we left Skagway right by the port there, it was in the 50s. And, warm for Alaska, not super chilly or anything like that. By the time we got up to the white snow of the cliffs and everything like that, it was so cold that we were able to see, the teal-colored glacier water up there. And it was just truly a remarkable, probably some of the best pictures we got were on the White Pass there. The staff was hilarious. The announcer, the engineer they got this thing down. And then the train got back down to Skagway, and the weather by that time had kind of turned, and it had gotten a lot more chilly and a little bit rainy. So we did a little shopping and kind of ducked around the city there, grabbed some chowder, and then headed back to the ship. But Skagway's awesome. No complaints whatsoever. I'm
glad you said that. That's one thing I would say is don't sleep on the train, because it is, don't sleep on the opportunity to take the train, because it is probably one of the cheaper excursions in Alaska. When you can pay up to $3,000 for a helicopter there, do the train.
I really enjoyed it. One of the things too, just to let people know, is I think you said this, when you were reviewing your latest Alaskan cruise. When you take the white pass, you'll never be able during the actual journey to get off of the train. Mm-hmm. But what you can do is they've got, pretty decent sized balconies outside of each car. So you can, go out and enjoy the actual climate changes and the scenery. And we actually saw a bear, Doug, which was cool. And it's one of a kind. I still don't understand how they built this railroad. It's incredible.
Yeah, I also learned that the saying "a ton of food," that's where that came from, the people who had to bring 2,000 pounds of food going up to the hills there. Next up was Glacier Bay. How was your day there?
Yeah, day 5 was Glacier Bay. It's, again, listed. Don't get confused if you're kind of researching Alaska. It'll be listed as a port stop on the itinerary, but it's actually a sea day because you never leave the ship. So what an amazing experience to see the nature that we saw from the Inside Passage. And Doug, I've never seen anything like Glacier Bay. I mean, again, talking to a guy who grew up in South Louisiana below sea level, and to see these incredible glaciers from miles away that just sort of dominate your entire, I guess, periphery of your vision. And then we saw, tons of sea otters, and just, it's something truly incredible, eye candy that can't be described by any of us unless you're able to actually see it yourself. Really enjoyed it. Again, great day. We, thankfully, again, Michaela's family had all of those balcony rooms. So we spent a lot of time in there. We spent a lot of time up at the observation lounge. And then for the first time, again, out of 29 cruises, I went to the bow of the ship, where the helipad is. And we were able, I tell you what, Doug, I'm not sure if all of the cruise lines do this. I'm sure they do. Norwegian had a hot chocolate bar and other, warm, toddy kind of drinks set up right there on the bow of the ship. And my wife and I were basically like looking at each other. There was just like, yeah, this is where it's at. It does not get any better than this.
NCL is known for nickel and diming, so I just have to ask all the hot, delicious drinks as you were going through the glaciers on deck there. Did those come with an extra cost?
No, it was complimentary, and then if you wanted a little something extra in it, you can use your drink package easily for that, which of course we had. And so, there may have been some, Bailey's or Kahlua that was added to mine. I'll freely admit it. And I couldn't get over the scenery. And my wife and I were out there actually so long, we ended up like just becoming freezing cold despite being wrapped up. But again, you're talking to two Floridians or one Louisiana turned Floridian here. So it was incredible. Just what an incredible sight.
And then Ketchikan was your last Alaska port. How was your day there?
Yeah, Ketchikan was probably the worst weather that we had in the trip. It was pretty much, raining, and I'm not going to call it Seattle rain. This was definitely at a constant, pretty cold and nasty kind of day. That didn't stop us, though. Look, again, as I told you, it's probably our only Alaskan cruise that we're ever going to do. So we made the trip over to Creek Street and saw the old brothels and shops. My wife dropped a few bills buying some authentic Alaskan jewelry, and we caught the bus over to what was probably my favorite part of Ketchikan, which was the Totem Museum. We didn't skimp out at all, but we probably would have stayed and done even more, Doug, had the weather been a little bit more cooperative. By about 3 o'clock or so in the afternoon, it was just straight pouring, almost, kind of thunderstorm style. So we headed back to the ship, and I'm not sure if all of the ships dock at this particular. Matter of fact, I know they don't. I'm answering my own question here. Norwegian kind of docks a little bit further away than the I guess, main part of Ketchikan. There's this giant warehouse of souvenirs right as you get off in Ketchikan, and it's really a nice touch. I know it sounds a little touristy, but it really was a nice touch to have that option, because all of the other ships, we saw a Holland America ship, we saw I think it was a smaller Royal ship, and a couple of others as well, a couple of premium, super premium lines like Silver Seas and all of that were parked right downtown or docked right downtown. And the gift shops and all the local shops right there were so packed with people, we kind of couldn't even get in. And so it was good that Norwegian kind of has their own little spot. And Doug, even though the weather, of course, finally had to clear right as we were about to sail away, we had the most beautiful sail away out of Ketchikan.
Love it. And then your final port of call was Victoria in British Columbia. How was your brief time there?
Yeah. As you mentioned, very, very cool port, very nice and clean city. I've had the chance to go to Canada multiple times. It never ceases to amaze me just how Canadians, first of all, they would remind you of people from the southern United States. They're just incredibly friendly. They really try to help. If you ask any of them just walking on the street, any questions or anything like that, they're more than willing to volunteer some helpful information for you. Unfortunately, we had only seriously 3 hours in Victoria. So we got there at 6 p.m. and the ship was rolling out. I think all aboard was either at 9 or 9:30. So we actually, instead of booking an excursion, we kind of just got off the ship, made the walk all the way around from where the port is into the city, took a couple of pictures by the Canada sign that's there, got a beer, I think, from one of the local pubs there, and then did some shopping right there. And Doug, that's about all we had time for. And again, the weather wasn't the most cooperative, but really a beautiful city there in Victoria.
Victoria and Seattle are super close. So what is it? You leave Victoria, you wake up, and you're back home in Seattle? Yeah,
exactly. And I'm obviously working in government. I'm well aware of how the Jones Act works. I really, though, wish that they would let, and I'm sure other cruises do, I really wish that they would give you a little more time in Victoria, because we would have loved to have, what is that famed hotel there that's so famous? We would have loved to have gone in and taken a tour of that and things of that nature. It really was a beautiful city. 3 hours in any port, you're just never going to be able to see much.
Yeah, no, 100%. How was your debark process and experience as you were getting off the ship?
So we actually, this was the first, it was the cruise of many firsts for us. This was actually the first cruise that we had ever taken to where we had booked our airfare through the cruise line. Okay. Normally I'm a, find the best deal, find the best time, everything like that. Or in this case, in Florida, if you want to drive or whatever the case is. So we actually thought we were going to be able to make this, but it just unfortunately didn't work out. There are only 2 flights available, at least for that day, that will fly you from Seattle directly back to Tampa, Florida. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the first one happened to be at 8 a.m. So Norwegian refused to put us on that flight. And I understand why, and I'll definitely get to that in a second. We tried to call originally when we were booking this, we tried to call, their travel services and everything and have them, hey, we'll assume the risk, all of those sort of things. And our plan was to get off, do the carry-off thing at 6 a.m., despite the amount of baggage that we had, and try to book it to the airport so that we could be home, with the time change by about 4 p.m. Unfortunately, we could never make that work. And I give Norwegian credit. They were right and we were wrong, because we actually, if you wanted to do the carry-off thing, which we were still considering, even though Norwegian flat out told us, you will not make that first flight. So we ended up kind of doing a leisurely morning, and I think our time to get off, we were a part of the pink tags. But because we had our transfer through Norwegian, we actually had a free charter bus with a bunch of other people back from the port to the airport. So that was a nice touch to not have to worry about trying to get an Uber or something like that. back to the airport, because Seattle's airport, of course, is, more in Tacoma. And so it's, what would you say, Doug, 20 to 30 minutes from the cruise port, maybe?
Yeah, easy. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So anyway, so we decided to get up, have some breakfast and things like that, let them handle our bags since we weren't doing the carry off. And we went to the airport, got to the airport probably, I would say, mid to late morning, maybe 10:30, 11, something like that. And our flight actually, unfortunately, wasn't until about 3 p.m. And so we thought about, not doing the transfer and maybe just doing a couple hours in downtown Seattle, going to the Space Needle, something like that. But we ultimately just ended up going back to the airport. And but with that, you're taking actually the second longest flight in the continental United States. The only longer flight, Doug, would have been Seattle to Miami. So this was 5.5 hours in the air from Seattle to Tampa. So,
wow. Okay.
we with the time change too, you're talking about, an 8.5, 9 hour turnaround. So we actually didn't get back to Tampa until almost 11 p.m. at night. So it was a long day, but debark was very easy, to answer your question.
Man, at 6'5", how do you do that?
But let me just say this, okay? If you decide to go with the booking through the cruise line with your air travel, they don't seem to care what seats you get either. And I tried to go on, they booked this, it was a Delta flight, just to let you know. I tried to go on Delta's website. I've got some Delta, status and priority and stuff like that. I tried to go on Delta's website and pay anything I could for an exit row. And this thing was completely full. We were on, I think, it was very, very nice, one of the newer Airbus planes, but my wife and I were in 41A and B or something like that. So not the world's most fun flight back.
Well, do you have any first-time tips to offer anyone taking either an Alaska cruise on NCL or doing their very first Alaska voyage?
You know what? And a lot of people were talking about this. We met so many, people of all ages, including Doug. I think we were surprised at how many people, whether they were millennials or what's the generation right behind millennials. I think we were surprised at how many 20s and 30 somethings, couples and things like that were actually on this ship. We thought it would be skewing a much more older crowd. So that was sort of a pleasant surprise, but I would live it up. I mean, especially for most of us, unless you're privileged with making a very good living for yourself, or unless you're just an absolute travel nut, most of us probably are not going to go to Alaska very often, and you're probably not going to do a whole lot of Alaskan cruises. We met so many people that were doing exactly what we were doing. Hey, this is probably going to be my only time doing this. I'm going to live it up. And I will say, though, that I think people in Alaska understand that too, and they understand it in a positive way and a little bit of in a negative way. The positive is they want you to have a good time when you're in Alaska. I really gathered that from the people that live there. Mm-hmm. They want you to appreciate what you're seeing because they realize you'll probably never go back, because of how far it is and things of that nature. So if you're thinking about taking that excursion, do it. If you're thinking about splurging on a nice jacket for this trip, do it. That's what I would be my best advice would be, especially if you're from the South, the East Coast, maybe even the Midwest, how many times are you going to truly be able to get up there?
Yeah.
So live it up, man. That would be my best advice for Alaskan cruising. As far as Norwegian, everything was great with the exception of they've got to figure out if you're going to have people that are coming off of excursions at 8, 9, 10 p.m. at night, you better keep those restaurants open a little bit later. And Doug, it just would be unfathomable to me that they haven't addressed that since we cruised in late May, because apparently, I remember seeing the itinerary because we had been looking for a while. they were doing the exact same times, the exact same itineraries for like the next 3 sailings in a row.
Yeah.
So I just think that would have to be something that would get fixed. But other than that, this cruise was incredible.
You know, Matt, what you were saying about the age group on there, it was interesting, too, because historically Holland America is known as, you know, the older demographic cruises them. But I talked to numerous couples in their 20s and 30s on board, even with their kids in their, you know, the 30s and 40s mostly. And 9 out of 10 people, I have it written down right here, 9 out of 10 people, this is a one and done trip for them. They don't plan on coming back, so they went all out. In fact, I was talking specifically to a couple from Kentucky, a family of 3, and they left no stone unturned because they're going all out. This is a bucket list trip. We're not promised tomorrow. They were probably in their probably early 40s, and they were living it up, man. It was just so cool to see.
It is. And again, I think the people in Alaska understand that. I think they realize, you know, and we've already said we're going to go back. I mean, at least we say we're going to go back. But I mean, Doug, it's about the same time period for us to fly to Lisbon, Portugal, or Spain as it is to get to Alaska. You see, I mean, that's my point is that if you're going to do this, you may as well go all in. That's my point.
Does Tampa have a lot of international lift out? Like, can you go up over to Europe direct from Tampa?
You can go to London. On British Airways. And they also now Virgin Atlantic that as well from Tampa. And then a lot of Latin American flights, but that's it.
Gotcha. Well, looking back, what was the biggest highlight of this cruise for y'all?
Doug, it was incredible being with my wife's family. I felt like I got closer to them. I've told you this story when I last reviewed a cruise with you. My wife and I met on a cruise out of Miami. She just happened to live in Tampa, and I happened to live in New Orleans at the time. But my wife is actually from the Midwest. So I'm very close with them, as close as you can be for, you know, being an in-law and them living, obviously, multiple states away. But it really gave us a chance to become closer as a family. And I still can't get over what I actually saw in Alaska. I will never forget these views. And it was so incredible. That's why my wife and I are like, we've got to get back there. We've got to go, even if it's not on a cruise, we've got to get back there and rent a cabin somewhere. Like, we're already thinking about it. That's how incredible that place is.
That's so awesome to hear, man. And your final thoughts of Norwegian Encore?
Great ship. It can really be a multifunctional ship, as I know Norwegian already uses it for. It seems to perform very well in Alaska for the Alaskan season. I could also see it performing very well in the Caribbean for the Caribbean season. I really wish they would somehow, I know this is pie in the sky, I wish that somehow they would create a little bit of a solarium area to satisfy being outside in Alaska for those cruises. But the observation lounge is absolutely incredible, and Norwegian does it about as good as anybody. I understand also that as opposed to, say, the Carnival Group or Royal Caribbean, that Norwegian possibly took it harder on the chin than any cruise line did during the shutdown. Mm-hmm. And you can tell that they are still making their way back. But their crew, their people, everybody worked their tails off to make sure that we had an unforgettable experience. So bravo to NCL. I still don't like freestyle cruising, but I will just say that.
We've been talking with Matt about his 7-night cruise out of Seattle on Norwegian Encore. Matt, thank you so much, my friend.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Doug.
Just back from a cruise? Let's talk about it. Email Doug at cruiseradio.net.
A big question we get at Cruise Radio is, how do I know if I need trip insurance? Simple answer. If you're getting on a plane, taking a road trip, or getting on a cruise ship, you need to have travel insurance. Hey, it's Doug Parker from my friends at tripinsurance.com. Not only does tripinsurance.com protect your vacation investment, but it also gives you peace of mind in case anything were to go wrong on your trip. How do they do it? They offer 3 different types of trip insurance policies. Good, better, and best. One policy for every vacation budget. But it doesn't just stop there. They're up to 40% lower when you shop around on other comparison sites. Plus, tripinsurance.com offers 24-hour customer support before, during, and after your trip, online claims assistance, and travel alerts to let you know what's going on at your destination. But find out for yourself. Check out tripinsurance.com.
All right, Dougie, let's see what we got for you, buddy. Cruise Radio is produced at the tripinsurance.com studios in Jacksonville, Florida. Get cruise news, ship reviews, and money-saving tips every Thursday on Cruise Radio. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show. If you want to help spread the word, give Cruise Radio a 5-star review. Find Cruise Radio where you listen to your favorite podcast or online at cruiseradio.net. I'm your announcer,